Welcome to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. This program is an outpouring of the ministry going on at Calvary Chapel, Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
Paul can now, at close to the end of his life, he can write those types of words. Look, the things that have happened to me, he's basically saying, I got to share the gospel with people that I never would have shared with otherwise, had that thing not happened to me. Can you say that too? I wonder if maybe you could think about things in your life and you'd be like, you know what? I never would have even been there had not this thing happened to me. But because I was there, I was able to help, encourage, strengthen, talk about, whatever.
This life can be incredibly hard. Our world is broken under the bondage of sin, and we suffer the consequences emotionally, physically, and spiritually on a daily basis. From minor aches and pains to the major crisis that rocks you to your core. It can be hard to see where God is in the midst of your suffering. But as Pastor Dan will point out in today's message, God is right there with you, and He alone can help you transform your hardship into victory and an opportunity to help those around you. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Philippians chapter 1. As he begins his message, go further with the gospel.
Paul just opened up the letter in the first 11 verses by just talking about him and them, him and these Philippians, how we love each other, we're going in the same direction. We have a mutual goal of letting Christ be known. Well, now, for the second half of the chapter, he's going to tell them what he thinks that looks like to make Christ known and to how you can go further with promoting Christ. We're being built up and edified, and we just read that in Ephesians, that's part of the church's mission, to build each other up and to edify each other in knowledge, in love, to support and encourage each other. That's what we do sort of behind the scenes. We help each other be ready. But then how do we go about and strengthen, how do we go about that and spread the gospel to more people? Well, that's kind of where Paul goes next in this conversation. It's sort of like in the first 11 verses, he came to the Philippians, gave them a hug, embraced them. Yeah, we're back together. Okay, now. And now he's going to finally talk to them here, starting in verse 12. So the first way I want you to see, starting in verse 12, that he talks to them about taking the gospel further, is to be ready to endure hard circumstances. There's no way to sugarcoat that. It's all through the scriptures. This idea that it will be difficult from time to time to speak of Christ to a world that hates him. Because by nature, those that are in this world that were never born the second time, they hate Christ. They want to live for themselves. They don't want you coming to tell them that there is another way, that there's another king other than themselves. So hard circumstances have a funny way of generating conversations about things that matter, including life and death and who Jesus Christ is. And I think you'll see that here, starting in verse 12. So we pick it up right there. Chapter 1, it's verse 12. Paul says, "But I would ye should understand, brethren," I want you to understand this, brethren, "that the things which happened unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel." Now remember, he's in prison. He's in a Roman prison. It's not the first time he's been in prison. He was arrested. He was put on trial, right? As a Roman citizen, he had his rights trampled on. But he's saying, though, that God has allowed all of this, and there's a reason for that. He understands that God is allowing the difficult circumstances of being wrongfully imprisoned and then even taken the whole way to Rome. He's allowing that to further the gospel. You read through the second half of the book of Acts and all the different things that happened to Paul, from shipwrecks to being bitten by serpents. Every single one of them, God used it to advance the gospel, to share with somebody else that didn't know yet who Jesus Christ was. Every one of them. And that Paul can now, at close to the end of his life, he can write those types of words. Look, the things that have happened to me, he's basically saying, I got to share the gospel with people that I never would have shared with otherwise, had that thing not happened to me. Could you say that too? I wonder if maybe you could think about things in your life and you'd be like, you know what? I never would have even been there had not this thing happened to me. But because I was there, I was able to help, encourage, strengthen, talk about, whatever. And that's what Paul's saying. All of these hard things have happened for the furtherance of the gospel. The easy things and the hard things of life have come so that we can present Christ to people. I think we all know this famous verse from Romans chapter 8, verse 28, very popular verse, very familiar verse, right? Very familiar verse? Okay. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. So the point here is it's not just that all things in life are good, it's that for those that are loved of God, for Christians who are on pursuit of God's mission, the things that will come into your life are pre-planned of God. You are called to those things for the extent that you can work them all together for God's glory and for good things. That's the purpose of it. Paul actually said to young Timothy, we'll get to that when we get to 2 Timothy, he said to Timothy, who was trying to pastor the church of Ephesus, he said, endure hardness as a good soldier. In other words, it's worth it. There's something on the other end of the trial, of the hardness, that is worth it. In fact, in some ways, it's only in the hardness that people can really see the value of what we're doing, that we really believe this, right? In fact, Jesus told a parable where he says, if you throw, I'm going to throw a wrinkle into this conversation to make the same point. He said, if you throw a banquet, this is my interpretation of what he said, this is not the exact words. If you throw a banquet only for people that could throw a banquet back to you some other time, what thank have you? It's like, even the sinners do that, he says. Like, anybody can do that because you're going to get something back. But if you throw a banquet for people that cannot give back, now your reward is great in heaven. And the idea is, you're going beyond. It's only in those extraordinary circumstances that your true character can be seen. It's only in a situation where it's not just the natural, normal, well, I do this and then I get back and everything's easy and it's reciprocity, I do for you and you do for me and everything's good and everybody's happy. No, it's in the exceptional circumstances of life. That is when Christian character can be seen. It's when you're doing something that you can't be you're not receiving back. It's when you're getting abused in hardship. Somebody's treating you wrong, something you don't deserve, and yet you react right and courteous and loving. These are the circumstances where Christ can be seen. These are the times when people will say, well, why are they acting like that? Right? And that's kind of where Paul's going with this conversation. It's in those exceptional circumstances, it's in the hardships where your character of Christ can be seen. Even to the point of when there's somebody, when the subject of death comes in, when it's you or when it's a family member and you're dealing with death and you watch a Christian that has a true hope, I mean a real hope, and that you can tell that they have something that is giving them peace. That I remember my grandmother passed away at 101. I think it was in the early 2000s. I remember being there. She had 13 kids, and I think 9 of them were there. There was probably another 30 or 40 of us grandkids in the hallway. It was just this big event at this hospital. And I remember being there for those last hours, probably 2 hours. And one thing I'll always remember from that is the amount of peace that she had, but that so many of the people that were there had. I've been at bedsides, I've been at funerals where there's a completely different flavor, where there's just a complete loss, there's a desperation and a darkness. This wasn't like that at all. And certainly it was, easier knowing that she was 101 and she had lived her life and she was ready to go be with the Lord, but there was such a peace in so many people's eyes. And even for her, I remember watching her take her last breath and just smiled this huge smile, and then that was it. And I'm telling you, those are the things that people need to see. And you don't experience those every day. You don't experience the hardships every day. We don't want to experience the hardships every day, but don't miss those occasions. Don't miss the realization that Paul's saying in those occasions, they've come upon us so that we can further the gospel. Sometimes it's just by the way we carry ourselves through those hard things. And sometimes it's because the Lord has brought us to a new person that we would have never been around except for that hardship. And now we get to share the gospel with them. So this is his opening principle here, that the things that happened to me in verse 12 have happened for the furtherance of the gospel. He sees a spiritual point on everything he's going through, and he wants them to understand it. And that's how he opened up verse 12. I want you to understand this. He said that because this isn't the first thought that comes to our mind, right? You get in a car wreck or somebody's house burns down or something tragic happens, and your first thought is not, oh, this has happened for the furtherance of the gospel. You don't think that naturally, okay? But that's why Paul's saying, listen, think about this. Slow down and think about this. You go back, rewind the tape, think about all of the hard things that's happened to you, and think about how God has weaved it together for good, for the Christians, for those that are called, those that love him. And that's his point in verse 12. Now, continue to verse 13. Verse 13, he says, so that my bonds in Christ are manifest or made known in all of the palace and in all others, or all other places, you could say. So the word here, palace, is practorium. This is the word that literally means the king or the governor's palace. This isn't just a palace. This is the palace kind of word. This word is used all through the scripture, particularly when it's talking about like Governor Pontius Pilate's palace back in Israel. But now, in this case, when he says the palace, he's talking about Caesar's palace. He's talking about Nero himself. So his bonds in Christ are made known in all the palace. He means the reason he's there as a prisoner in Rome has been made known even to those of Nero's, they call Nero's guard, a particular group of soldiers. They call them something specific. But that's what he's saying, even to them, that the reason I'm here serving for Christ has been made known. So he just said in verse 12 that the hard things happen for Christ to be made known even further. But now verse 13 is basically a practical example of the fact that the gospel is reaching people that it never would have reached otherwise except for hard times, right? So he's saying, even here in this prison, I'm reaching people that I would have never had the opportunity to reach before. What perspective, right? This takes a hot minute to get that mature, right? Because your first thought isn't typically to say, oh, this is great. I'm sitting on a dirt floor chained to a soldier. This is wonderful. It takes a minute to get to this place. But Paul has now had the time to relax, and he's speaking the truth, that these things are valuable. It's not just that he's had time to think about it. He's already lived this, right? Do you remember that? Back in this very church of Philippi? Remember when they first founded this church? He found Lydia down by the river. She got saved. And then he cast out demons out of this little demoniac girl, which got him in trouble and thrown in prison in Philippi. He's already been through this. He's already watched soldiers get saved and come to Christ in Philippi. So now here he is in Rome, and he's saying, look, it's still happening. I understand that the Lord can use this time that I'm here, and I'm willing. And I'm willing. What perspective? That's amazing. Wow. It takes a minute to get there, though. I want to remember that. Paul's at the end of his life. This isn't like somebody that just came to know the Lord yesterday. It's taken him time to get to this place, and he's mature, and now he's passing this on to others to say, God can use the hard things of your life. Let's keep going. Verse 14. And many of the brethren in the Lord are waxing confident in my bonds. They are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So it's another byproduct. He's saying, look, another byproduct of me being here in jail is that there are other people that are growing bold. They see my witness, they see what I've been going through, and they realize they should do it too. It encourages others to continue to grow. So our bold witness through hard times, it not just helps us preach to the lost, but it actually also helps embolden other believers to be strengthened and do do what they need to do, have the faith to grow further themselves. So see, in these hard times, look for unbelievers to be influenced by you, but you're also influencing other believers. Other believers are like, man, yeah, I could do that too. I should be like that, man. How come, Paul's really showing me the way. And so it's going to strengthen others around you. Have you ever had that situation where like you see somebody that's sharing their faith with somebody at work or another place, and you're like, man, I could have done that. Why didn't I do that? And so that's having its effect, Paul says. Others are waxing confident because of him in his bonds. Verse 15. Now there's a little contention here he brings up in verse 15. He says, some of them are indeed preaching Christ even of envy and of strife, and some are preaching of goodwill. The one, in verse 16, the one preaches Christ of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. So the people that are being stirred up by Paul's bold witness there in Rome, not all of them have a pure motive, is what he's saying. Some of them are being stirred up just out of their own sense of pride. Like, well, Paul can do it, I could do it too, And they're not really motivated simply to share the gospel. Have you ever noticed, Christianity brings conflict into the typical worldly situation, right? Okay? So Paul's bringing this conflict, and there's some people that are standing up and they're like, yeah, they just have a rebel attitude. They're just like, oh, if there's conflict, I'm there. What are we being rebellious about? I'm there. And so Paul's saying some have this rebellious attitude just to be rebellious, just to bring up whatever. But some are supporting Paul's cause in sincerity. There's a competitive nature in all of us to different levels, to different degrees. And that's what he's saying. Some people are motivated just out of competitiveness to try to add to what Paul's doing, but it's out of their own selfish motivations. Kind of always looking at another preacher to kind of make sure you're doing as good or better than them. There is, even within the church, there's always this tendency for some to get into this competitive nature of looking around town like, well, what are they doing over there? Well, I can do it better than that. And then they launch some new program at their church, or something like that. And they're just doing it out of some kind of competitive nature rather than supporting each other and keeping their eyes focused on promoting Christ. And so some are just being rebellious or just, oh, are we mad against Rome today? Yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. And so don't do that. I remember a time years ago, long time ago. It wasn't yesterday. It was a long time ago. I remember back in Maine, we had a rotation of Sunday school teachers, men that would rotate, lead a Sunday school set for a period of time, and then, okay, now we'll have a different person lead it for a period of time, and we'll have somebody else do it, and then it'll eventually rotate back around. And I remember when that kind of rotation first started, I remember having all of those thoughts come to my mind, like, oh, I want to be the best one out of the 4 or 5 of us, that did it. I mean, how dumb is that, right? I mean, all 5 of us are there to read the Bible and explain it and just promote Christ, right? And then you get this thought in your head like, well, I want to do better than the last guy that was just up here, It's just foolish, right? But that's what Paul's saying. That's the same mindset. Paul's getting all this notoriety there in Rome, and particularly because of being thrown in prison for what he was doing. And others are saying like, yeah, I could do that too. And some are just doing it out of selfish motivation. Some are doing it for self-promotion, but some are doing it out of sincerity to preach Christ. But in all of it, like even look at verse 18. What then? So having some speaking up for bad motives, some speaking up for good motives. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached. And I therefore do rejoice, yea, and I will rejoice. So bottom line is, Paul is just glad that people are talking about the Lord. He's like, look, it's not all pure, it's not all clean, it's not all right and proper talk, but look, at least people are talking about the Lord. And he's glad for that. I remember one time I had a witness encounter years ago. And I remember I started to witness to this guy, and then somebody else that I didn't really know that well, he came over and tried to support me. Like, yeah, he's right. Yeah, let's talk about the Lord. And he started throwing out things that were just wrong. I think he was a Mormon, the more I think about it. He was saying about he tried to continually introduce the idea that Jesus and God were separate people, having nothing to do with each other. And I just remember, thanks for trying to help, but this, this is not working. And so that's the idea of what Paul's facing. He has kind of poked the hornet's nest, and all kinds of people are coming out. But he's at least glad, look, the subject is coming up. We have more and more opportunities now to talk about things, all because Paul was willing to endure hardship and just push through and look for the opportunities. And so that's where he begins this chapter, and he's just grateful for the chances to speak. And when you speak, you'll see that same thing. Open your mouth a little more often than you do, and watch other people just come out of the woodwork and want to talk about it. It's interesting. So not only hardness, but now we go to verse 19, and we transition to another way of furthering the gospel. And the second way he's going to bring up is the idea of bringing full commitment. So endure hardness, but also bring your whole life, bring a full commitment. And then you will see more opportunities to serve the Lord, to promote the gospel. Verse 19, Paul says, "For I know that this shall turn to my salvation through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ." Verse 20, "According to my earnest expectation and my hope, that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but that with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by my life or by my death." So he's saying that the proof of his salvation is on public display right now. And that's what he means when he says in verse 19, "I know that this shall turn to my salvation." The things I'm going through are the proof of my salvation. I would just hang it up. I would just go home if this wasn't real to me. But these things are proving my salvation. This public display of God's grace is being aided along in verse 19 by the Philippians' prayers and by God's Spirit. And so he understands, he recognizes their support, that they're in this with him. He has the power to endure hard things and to push forward, being fully committed because of God's Spirit within him, and that they're praying for him. And they're praying, "Lord, strengthen him." And the Lord is sending his Spirit to help Paul, to guide him, to help him to stick with it, and to be a good example. And then really in verse 20, what he's saying is that he fully expects that Christ is being exalted because of his boldly displaying of Jesus in his life. He's not expecting to get out of this danger. He doesn't know for sure if he's going to get out of this prison or if he's going to die there. He says that. But he knows that either way, he's able to make God known. And that's what matters to him. Now, later on, we'll read a couple verses where he seems to indicate that he wants to get out, and if he gets out, he's going to go see the Philippians. But he makes it clear in this verse that he doesn't know. At the end of verse 20, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether in my life or in my death. Whether I continue to live for many years or if I die tomorrow, I know God will be exalted and magnified and seen through me because of the way I live my life. Man, that's confidence. You can't say that unless your life is committed. But although I think sometimes we get a false impression as if Paul was perfect. And he wasn't. He wasn't perfect. His confidence is in Christ. His confidence isn't in saying, well, I'm wonderful. His confidence is in saying that I'm just promoting Jesus. When I talk about Jesus, I have confidence. When I talk about myself and how great I am, I have no confidence. You see the difference? And Paul keeps the message on Christ. And that's where confidence is. That's how he could say, I know I'm going to go to the day of my death, whenever that is, with confidence.
You've been listening to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. Today, Pastor Dan has been diving into the New Testament book of Philippians. Written by the Apostle Paul while he was imprisoned, Philippians teaches us how to find joy in the midst of hardship. True joy isn't dependent on our circumstances, but it's anchored in our relationship with Jesus Christ. Paul models this beautifully, encouraging believers to rejoice always, even while facing trials, because of the hope we have in Jesus. Joy, according to St. Paul, isn't a fleeting emotion, but a deep, abiding trust in God's goodness and sovereignty. That's why, despite his horrible situation, Paul still had profound joy. This message is a powerful reminder that no matter what difficulties we may face, we can have supernatural peace and joy in the Lord. If today's teaching spoke to you and you'd like to hear more, visit us online at ccchambersburg.org. Under the Media tab, you'll find an archive of our messages, or you can download our app to stay connected from anywhere. You can also learn more about our ministry at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And if you're nearby, we'd love to have you join us for worship and Bible study. Our service times and directions can be found on our website at ccchambersburg.org. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for being with us. We'd love for you to join us again next time to learn valuable insights and biblical truths from the book of Philippians on Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.